The Grayson Asylum stood as a monument to despair, its crumbling facade half hidden by the creeping embrace of ivy and shadows cast by the surrounding woods. Decades of abandonment had left the place eerily still, yet alive with whispered stories of madness and malevolence. The once proud letters etched above the arched entry had faded. Grayson Psychiatric Institute. The words still carried a weight, a chilling promise of secrets buried deep within its decayed halls. It was a brisk October evening in 1957 when the asylum closed its doors for the last time. An investigation into reports of abuse, patient disappearances, and unethical experiments forced the administration to act. The patients were relocated, the staff disbanded, and Dr. Elias Grayson, the head psychiatrist, vanished without a trace. Officially, the institute was deemed unsafe, its history swept under the rug. But for the residents of Blackthorn Hollow, the asylum's shadow loomed large. Rumors of hauntings spread like wildfire, lights flickering in empty corridors, screams carried on the wind, and ghostly figures glimpsed through shattered windows. Decades passed, yet no one dared to approach it. Until now, Sophia Delacroix tightened her coat against the autumn chill as she approached the wrought iron gates of the Grayson Asylum. She'd grown up hearing her mother's whispered warnings about this place, though the reasons had always been vague. Stay away from the shadows, her mother used to say, her voice tinged with fear. Those warnings were all but forgotten until 2 weeks ago when a letter arrived. The envelope was unmarked, the handwriting delicate but deliberate. Your family's truth lies within the asylum walls. Seek it and you'll understand. At first, Sophia dismissed it as a prank. But something about the message lingered in her mind. A strange familiarity, as if the words carried a weight only she could feel. As a journalist, she'd spent years pursuing stories that others avoided, drawn to the darker corners of human experience. This felt personal in a way she couldn't explain, and that terrified her. Sophia's hands trembled as she pushed the gate open, the rusted metal groaning in protest. Beyond the gate, the asylum loomed larger than she'd imagined, its silhouette jagged and unnatural against the darkening sky. Her pulse quickened. Are you sure about this? Ethan Parker's voice broke the silence, his tone laced with skepticism. He stood a few feet behind her, arms crossed and a wary look on his face. A local historian and reluctant ally, Ethan had agreed to accompany Sophia on her investigation, though his reservations were clear. Not even slightly, Sophia replied, forcing a smile. But that's never stopped me before. Ethan sighed, his breath visible in the crisp air. The people in town think this place is cursed. They say the shadows here don't stay where they belong. Sophia raised an eyebrow. And you? What do you think? He hesitated, glancing at the asylum. I think some doors are better left closed. The words hung in the air like a warning, but Sophia pushed them aside. This was her chance to uncover the truth about the asylum, about her family, and perhaps about herself. They stepped inside, the atmosphere shifting the moment they crossed the threshold. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. Their footsteps echoed in the vast, empty foyer, each step a reminder of the lives that once filled these walls. Sophia paused, her gaze drawn to a faded mural on the far wall. It depicted a serene meadow, bright and full of life, a stark contrast to the grim reality of the asylum. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Through healing, we find hope." Hope? Ethan muttered, shaking his head. If only they knew. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a faint rustling, like fabric brushing against stone. Sophia spun around, her heart racing. Did you hear that? Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched. Yeah, probably just the wind. But Sophia wasn't convinced. The sound had felt deliberate, as if something or someone was watching. She shook off the thought and pressed on, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. As they moved deeper into the asylum, the building seemed to come alive. The walls whispered with unseen voices, the floorboards creaked under invisible weight, and the faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. They reached what appeared to be an administrative office, the door hanging off its hinges. Inside, dusty file cabinets lined the walls, their contents spilling onto the floor. Sophia knelt down, sifting through the papers. "What are you looking for?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "Anything that can tell us what happened here," Sophia replied, her fingers brushing against an aged photograph. She picked it up, her breath catching. The photo showed a group of patients and staff standing outside the asylum, their faces solemn. In the center stood Dr. Elias Grayson, his piercing gaze seeming to stare directly at Sophia. Beneath the photo, a single word was scrawled in ink: redemption. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. "Grayson," he said quietly, "the man who started it all." Sophia nodded, her grip tightening on the photo. She didn't know what drew her to this place or why her connection to it felt so personal. But one thing was certain: the answers she sought lay within these walls, and she was prepared to face whatever darkness awaited her. The town of Blackthorn Hollow seemed to exist in perpetual twilight, the sun's light never fully penetrating the thick veil of mist that clung to its narrow streets. Sophia parked her car outside the only inn in town, a small, weathered building with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read The Hollow Hearth. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke, and though the streets were empty, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The innkeeper, an older woman with sharp eyes and a curt demeanor, barely looked up as Sophia entered. "You're here for the asylum," the woman said, her voice tinged with disapproval. It wasn't a question. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. "I'm a journalist, just doing some research." The woman snorted, sliding a rusted key across the counter. "Research, huh? Plenty have come to poke around that place. They don't stay long." "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, leaning in. The innkeeper's eyes met hers, hard and unflinching. "You'll find what you're looking for, but don't think you'll leave unchanged." Sophia suppressed a shiver and took the key, retreating to her room. The words lingered in her mind, a quiet warning she couldn't shake. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the main street. As she unpacked her things, she noticed a man standing across the road, watching her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of a hat. Sophia stepped closer to the window for a better look, but in the blink of an eye he was gone. Unease settled in her chest like a stone. The next morning, Sophia met Ethan Parker at the town library. He was seated at a corner table, surrounded by stacks of old books and faded photographs. His glasses caught the light as he glanced up, his expression skeptical. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said as she sat down. "I didn't come all this way to quit," Sophia replied, pulling out her notebook. Ethan sighed, pushing a photograph toward her. It showed the asylum as it had been in its prime. A grand stone building with tall windows and neatly trimmed hedges lining the path to the entrance. Grayson Asylum opened in 1923, Ethan began. It was meant to be a sanctuary for the mentally ill, a place of innovation and compassion. At least, that's what they told people. Sophia studied the photo, her fingers tracing the edges. "What happened?" "Dr. Elias Grayson happened," Ethan said grimly. He was a brilliant psychiatrist, but his methods were unconventional. He believed the mind could be reshaped, that madness was just a matter of perspective. He started experimenting on patients, trying to unlock their potential. Sophia frowned. "What kind of experiments?" "Everything from sensory deprivation to chemical therapies. Some say he even dabbled in hypnosis and other things." People started disappearing. Patients, staff. When the authorities finally investigated, the place was a mess. Records missing, bodies unaccounted for. They shut it down, but no one ever really got answers. Sophia's pen flew across the page, her mind racing. "And Dr. Grayson?" Ethan hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Gone. Some say he fled, others think he stayed. Either way, the asylum's been abandoned ever since. But the locals know better than to go near it." Sophia leaned back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. The story was bigger than she'd imagined, darker. And yet, something about it felt strangely familiar, as if the threads of her own life were tangled with the asylum's history. "What about the rumors?" she asked. The hauntings. Ethan gave her a measured look. I don't put much stock in ghost stories, but if you're asking if people have seen things, heard things, then yeah, they have. And so have I. Sophia's eyebrows shot up. You've been there. Once, Ethan admitted. When I was younger, a group of us thought it'd be fun to sneak in. We didn't get far before things started happening. Doors slamming, shadows moving. I've never run so fast in my life. His eyes darkened, the memory clearly unsettling him. Why agree to help me then? Sophia asked. Ethan looked away, his fingers drumming on the table. I don't know. Maybe I'm hoping for closure. Or maybe I just want to make sure you don't get yourself killed. Sophia smiled faintly. I'll take my chances. Later that afternoon, they set out for the asylum. The drive was short but tense, the narrow road winding through dense woods. The air grew colder as they approached, the trees seeming to close in around them. When they arrived, the asylum loomed before them, a hulking mass of stone and shadow. The building seemed alive, its shattered windows like watching eyes. Sophia's breath caught as she stepped out of the car, the weight of the place pressing down on her. The whispers her mother used to utter came rushing back. Stay away from the shadows. Ethan joined her, his expression grim. Last chance to back out. Sophia squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening. Not a chance. They crossed the threshold together, the heavy iron gates creaking shut behind them. The air inside the asylum grounds was colder, sharper, as if the building itself were breathing. Sophia felt a chill creep down her spine as they approached the main entrance. The door was slightly ajar, a faint breeze pushing it open further. Ethan paused, glancing at her. Ready? No, she admitted, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. But let's go anyway. And with that, they stepped into the darkness. The air inside the Grayson Asylum was thick with the weight of decades-old silence, broken only by the faint creak of their footsteps on warped floorboards. Dust swirled in the beam of Sophia's flashlight as she scanned the cavernous entry hall, its walls stained with water damage and graffiti. The building seemed frozen in time, an eerie museum of neglect and decay. Sophia's gaze landed on a grand staircase that split into two winding paths at the top. The banister, once polished oak, was now splintered and dull. Above it, a tarnished chandelier hung precariously, its crystals catching faint glimmers of light from the broken windows. Feels like the place is watching us, Ethan muttered, his voice low. Sophia nodded, though she didn't admit how much the thought unnerved her. She pointed toward a door marked records office in peeling gold lettering. Let's start there. The office was cluttered with overturned filing cabinets, yellowed papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. A single desk remained intact, its surface buried beneath layers of dust. Start digging, Sophia said, her tone sharper than intended. She wanted to distract herself from the oppressive atmosphere, from the whispers she thought she'd heard moments ago. Ethan rifled through a stack of papers while Sophia focused on the desk drawers. Inside, she found medical records, patient files, and faded photographs, each one a snapshot of a life left behind. Look at this, Ethan said, holding up a weathered document. It was a ledger, its pages filled with rows of names. Admissions records? Sophia guessed. Sort of, Ethan said grimly. But look at the annotations. Sophia leaned over his shoulder. Beside certain names, someone had scrawled cryptic notes in red ink. Unresponsive to treatment. Transferred to Wing C. Escalate therapy. What's Wing C? Sophia asked, her brow furrowing. Ethan shook his head. It's not on any of the blueprints I've seen. Must have been kept off the books. Sophia felt a chill crawl down her spine. Escalate therapy. What do you think that means? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Among the records, Sophia found a tattered journal. The name Dr. Elias Grayson was embossed on the cover in faded gold lettering. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. March 15, 1947. The mind is a labyrinth, and I am its cartographer. Each patient is a map waiting to be charted. Their madness a territory I must conquer. Progress has been promising, though the board's insistence on ethical boundaries hampers true discovery. Sophia read the entry aloud, her voice steady despite the unease building within her. "He didn't see patients as people," she said quietly. "They were experiments to him." Ethan frowned. "Sounds like a megalomaniac. What else does it say?" Sophia turned the pages, each entry darker than the last. June 2nd, 1949. Patient number 312 exhibited remarkable resistance to standard treatments. Initiated phase 2 of the mind unbinding protocol. Early results suggest the existence of a subconscious barrier that, once broken, could unlock untapped potential. Success here would revolutionize psychiatry. Mind unbinding protocol? Ethan repeated, his expression incredulous. "What the hell does that mean?" "Something terrible," Sophia said, her stomach twisting. She flipped to the final entry, dated mere weeks before the asylum's closure. October 10th, 1957. "The whispers grow louder. They mock me, remind me of the failures, the ones who couldn't handle the process. But they don't understand. Greatness requires sacrifice. I am close to a breakthrough, closer than anyone has ever been. The board threatens to shut me down, but they cannot comprehend what I've achieved. Soon, the barriers will fall, and the truth will be revealed." Sophia's breath hitched. "Whispers," she murmured, glancing at Ethan. "Do you think he meant?" Ethan shook his head, his jaw tight. "I don't want to think about it." The journal painted a picture of a man consumed by ambition, willing to cross any line in his pursuit of knowledge. But the more Sophia read, the more she felt that something else was at play, something beyond human understanding. A sudden thud echoed from the hallway, making both of them jump. "What was that?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Sophia's flashlight flickered as she turned toward the door. The sound had come from deeper within the building, beyond the reach of their light. "Only one way to find out," she said, forcing her feet to move despite the dread coiling in her stomach. They followed the noise, their footsteps slow and cautious. The hallway was lined with closed doors, each one bearing a small window covered in grime. Sophia shone her light through one of them, revealing an empty room with a single chair bolted to the floor. "This place gets worse the further in you go," Ethan muttered. As they approached a heavy metal door at the end of the corridor, the temperature dropped noticeably. Sophia could see her breath now, each exhale forming small clouds in the frigid air. The door was marked Wing C. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "This place actually exists." Sophia's pulse quickened as she reached for the door. It groaned loudly as it swung open, revealing a set of stairs descending into darkness. "Nope," Ethan said immediately, taking a step back. "Absolutely not." Sophia shot him a determined look. "You said you'd help me." "I didn't sign up for a horror movie," Ethan protested. But when Sophia started down the stairs, he followed, muttering curses under his breath. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint hum of electricity buzzed in Sophia's ears. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a long corridor lined with observation windows. Inside the rooms were remnants of the past. Rusted gurneys, restraints dangling from walls, and shattered glass on the floor. But it was the writing on the walls that stopped Sophia in her tracks. Scrawled in what looked disturbingly like blood were words and phrases. "Set them free. The door must open. Shadows speak the truth." "This is insane," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia's flashlight caught something glinting on the floor. A small key, tarnished and cold to the touch. Beside it lay a nameplate, its lettering scratched but still legible. Dr. Elias Grayson. Sophia picked up the key, her mind racing. "This has to open something important," she said. Ethan glanced nervously around. "Can we go now? Please?" Sophia nodded, though she knew they'd have to return. The asylum wasn't done with them yet. As they climbed back up the stairs, a faint sound echoed behind them. A whisper, soft and fleeting, but unmistakable. Neither of them dared to look back. The asylum's interior seemed darker than it had before, as though the shadows had grown bolder since their discovery of Wing C. Sophia and Ethan returned to the main floor in silence, the weight of what they had seen pressing down on them. The air felt thicker, the stillness broken only by their breaths and the occasional creak of floorboards. Sophia clutched the tarnished key she'd found, its cold metal biting into her palm. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for her, that it was leading her deeper into the heart of the asylum's secrets. "We should leave," Ethan said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, urgent. "We've seen enough." Sophia shook her head. "We're not even close. There's more here. I can feel it." "Feeling it doesn't mean it's safe," Ethan snapped. "This place, it's wrong, Sophia. You felt it too down there. It's like the walls are alive." Sophia turned to face him, her expression resolute. "I didn't come all this way to stop now. That key is important, Ethan. It's a piece of the puzzle." He stared at her, frustration etched on his face, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he gestured toward the hallway ahead. "Fine, lead the way. But if something happens, don't say I didn't warn you." They moved cautiously, their flashlights casting long beams of light that seemed to stretch endlessly in the gloom. The asylum's architecture felt labyrinthine, with hallways that twisted and branched off into more corridors, as though the building itself wanted to confuse and trap them. Sophia's flashlight landed on a doorway with a faded sign above it, Patient Recreation Hall. She pushed the door open, revealing a cavernous room filled with broken furniture and debris. "This must have been where they tried to make life normal," Ethan said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. The room was lined with tall windows, their panes shattered, letting in the faint glow of the moon. In the center of the room was a piano, its once glossy surface now dulled by layers of dust. Sophia approached it, brushing her fingers against the keys. The sound that emerged was jarring, the notes discordant and hollow. "Creepy," Ethan muttered. Sophia's gaze drifted to the walls, where faded murals depicted cheerful scenes. Children playing in meadows, families gathered around a picnic. But the paint had cracked and peeled, distorting the images into grotesque parodies of joy. "This place was never what it seemed," Sophia said softly. As they turned to leave, a faint sound stopped them in their tracks. It was music, soft, mournful, and unmistakably coming from the piano. Sophia spun around, her flashlight trained on the instrument, but no one was there. The keys moved on their own, pressing down in a slow, deliberate melody. Ethan grabbed her arm. "We need to go. Now." Sophia's pulse raced, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the piano. The melody seemed to call to her, its notes tugging at something deep within her mind. "Sophia!" Ethan's voice snapped her out of her trance, and she stumbled back. The music stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. They hurried out of the recreation hall, their footsteps echoing loudly in the corridor. "Tell me you're done now," Ethan said, his voice shaking. Sophia hesitated. Her instincts told her to keep going, but the fear in Ethan's eyes gave her pause. She opened her mouth to respond when a new sound reached them, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the end of the hallway. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is," Ethan whispered. Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she took a step forward, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and then stopped altogether. They froze, holding their breath as the silence stretched on. Then, a door creaked open. Sophia's flashlight swept across the hallway, landing on the source of the noise. A door on the left had swung open, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. "This feels like a bad idea," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. Sophia ignored him and approached the door, her steps cautious. She peered inside, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The room was small, with walls covered in peeling wallpaper. A single chair sat in the center, its leather seat cracked and torn. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying gently as though moved by an unseen hand. On the far wall was a mirror, its surface cloudy with grime. Sophia stepped closer, her reflection distorted and ghostly. As she stared into the mirror, a movement caught her eye. something shifted behind her. A shadow that didn't belong to either of them. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice tight. Ethan nodded, his face pale. "Let's get out of here." But before they could move, the door slammed shut behind them. Sophia whirled around, her flashlight flickering. The chains rattled violently, and a low, guttural sound filled the room, like a growl rising from the depths of the earth. Ethan pounded on the door, shouting, "Open it! Open the damn door!" Sophia backed away from the mirror, her heart pounding. The shadow in the glass grew darker, more defined, until it took the shape of a figure. Tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to glow. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the room. "Ethan!" Sophia screamed, panic overtaking her. Suddenly, the door burst open, and they stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. The growling ceased, and the room fell silent once more. Ethan slammed the door shut, his hands shaking. What the hell was that? Sophia didn't answer. Her mind was racing, replaying the events over and over. The shadow, the growl, the oppressive presence. It all felt too real to dismiss as imagination. As they moved further down the corridor, Sophia clutched the key tightly. Whatever secrets this asylum held, she was certain the key would unlock them. But with every step they took, the shadows seemed to grow darker, the air heavier, and the whispers louder. The asylum wasn't just a place of abandoned horrors. It was alive. The asylum seemed to change the further they ventured into its depths. Hallways twisted and stretched unnaturally, and rooms they had passed earlier seemed to vanish when they retraced their steps. The building was alive in ways that defied logic, as though it were shifting to keep them trapped. Sophia's grip on the tarnished key tightened, the cool metal grounding her amidst the unease swirling in her chest. She and Ethan moved in silence, their flashlights sweeping across the walls, which were now covered in strange marks. Scratches, handprints, and symbols that seemed to pulse faintly when the light hit them. "This isn't just decay," Ethan muttered, his voice barely audible. "This is something else." Sophia didn't respond. Her focus was on the path ahead, where the key seemed to be pulling her. It wasn't a physical pull, but an instinctive feeling, a certainty that it was leading her towards something she needed to see. They stopped at another door, this one heavy and rusted, with a small rectangular slot near the top. The words "Observation Room 7" were stenciled above it in faded paint. "Think it fits?" Ethan asked, nodding toward the key in her hand. "Only one way to find out," Sophia replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, and with a sharp twist, the door creaked open. Inside, the room was sterile and cold, a stark contrast to the decay of the rest of the asylum. The walls were lined with shelves of medical equipment, much of it rusted and broken. In the center of the room was a table, its surface stained dark with something that could only be blood. Chains and restraints hung from its edges, their metal glinting faintly in the dim light. Sophia swallowed hard as her flashlight landed on a series of jars on one of the shelves. Each jar contained a murky liquid, and within it floated indistinct shapes, organs perhaps, or fragments of something once human. "This is..." Ethan trailed off, unable to finish his thought. "Horrific," Sophia whispered. But it wasn't just the room's contents that unsettled her. It was the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes boring into her back. She turned, her flashlight darting across the walls, but there was nothing there. Only shadows that seemed to deepen as she looked at them. Ethan rifled through a stack of papers on a nearby desk, his expression growing darker with each page. "These are experiment logs," he said. He was performing surgeries on patients, cutting into their brains to try and unlock something he called the door to the mind. Sophia frowned, her stomach twisting. The door to the mind? What does that even mean? Ethan shook his head. It sounds like pseudoscience at best. But these notes... He held up a page, the handwriting erratic and uneven. He talks about the shadows beyond the door, like he believed there was some other dimension or plane of existence that he could access through his patients. Sophia's skin prickled as she read over his shoulder. May 5, 1955. Patient number 428 has shown the most promise yet. During phase 3 of the procedure, she spoke of figures watching her from the corners of the room. She called them the whispering shadows. I believe this is the breakthrough I've been seeking, the point of contact between the mind and the unknown. June 14, 1955. The shadows grow bolder. They speak to me now, guiding my hand. They demand sacrifices. They promise knowledge, power, redemption. But at what cost? Sacrifices, Sophia murmured, her throat dry. He wasn't just experimenting. He was killing people, Ethan finished, his voice hollow. The realization hit them both like a blow. This wasn't just an asylum. It had been a slaughterhouse, a place where the line between science and madness blurred until it vanished completely. A sudden noise shattered the tense silence. It was faint at first, like the distant sound of a child crying. Sophia froze, her breath catching in her throat. Did you hear that? Ethan nodded, his face pale. Yeah, and I don't want to know what it is. But the sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't just crying now. It was laughter, high-pitched and distorted, echoing unnaturally through the corridors. Run, Ethan said, his voice tight with fear. Sophia didn't need to be told twice. They bolted from the room, their footsteps pounding against the floor as the laughter followed them, relentless and mocking. The hallways seemed to stretch endlessly, the doors they passed blurring into the darkness. Finally, they reached a large metal door with a circular window near the top. Sophia shoved it open, and they stumbled into a cavernous chamber that made her stomach drop. The room was filled with hospital beds, each one occupied by a figure. At first glance, they appeared to be patients, but as Sophia's flashlight swept over them, she realized the truth. The figures were desiccated, their skin stretched tight over skeletal frames. Their mouths hung open in silent screams, and their eyes, lifeless yet staring, seemed to follow her as she moved. "Oh my God!" Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. Sophia approached one of the beds, her legs shaking. A metal tag hung from the figure's wrist, etched with a number. Number 428. Patient 428, she said aloud, the words catching in her throat. She looked closer, her flashlight illuminating the figure's face. Despite the mummified state of the body, she could make out the faintest resemblance, a face she had seen in an old photograph of her grandmother. "No," Sophia whispered, stumbling back. "It's not possible." Ethan's eyes widened. "Sophia, we need to leave. Now." But Sophia couldn't move. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. Her grandmother had been here, had been one of Grayson's patients, and now she was trapped in this nightmare just like the others. The laughter returned, louder and more menacing, echoing off the walls. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, shifting and writhing as they closed in around them. "Run!" Ethan shouted, grabbing Sophia's arm and pulling her toward the exit. They sprinted down the hallway, the shadows chasing them, their laughter turning into guttural growls. The air grew colder, thicker, as though the asylum itself were trying to suffocate them. When they finally burst through the front doors and into the night, the silence was deafening. The shadows didn't follow them outside, but the memory of their presence lingered, heavy and oppressive. Sophia collapsed onto the ground, her breathing ragged. The key was still in her hand, its cold weight a reminder of the horrors they had uncovered. Ethan knelt beside her, his face pale and drawn. "We're done," he said firmly. "You got what you came for. Now let's get the hell out of here." But as Sophia stared at the asylum's dark silhouette, she knew the truth. They weren't done. Not yet. Sophia sat on the edge of her bed in the dim room at the Hollow Hearth Inn, the key clutched tightly in her hand. Ethan had fallen silent during the drive back from the asylum, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Now he sat in a chair across from her, his head in his hands. For once, the words that usually came so easily to her as a journalist had abandoned her. How could she explain what they had seen? The shadowy figures, the laughter, the desiccated remains of the patients. Her grandmother among them? I can't stop seeing her face, Sophia said finally, her voice trembling. She was there, Ethan. My grandmother. She. Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with equal parts fear and pity. We don't know that for sure. I do, Sophia snapped, the key biting into her palm. It was her, and I need to know what happened to her. Why she was there, what Grayson did to her. You don't need to know, Ethan said, his tone sharper than she expected. You want to know. There's a difference, Sophia, and that difference could get us killed. Sophia stood, pacing the small room. If it were someone you loved, could you just walk away? Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. His silence was answer enough. Sophia pulled the journal from her bag, flipping through the pages of Grayson's erratic scrawl. Each entry seemed to pull her deeper into his mind, a place twisted by ambition and obsession. Here, she said, tapping an entry. September 2nd, 1956. Patient number 428 continues to exhibit resistance to the process. The shadows favor her. They linger near her bed, whispering to her in ways they do not to the others. She speaks of memories that are not her own, of visions that defy explanation. The shadows have chosen her. I must proceed carefully. The shadows favored her, Sophia murmured, the words chilling her. Ethan frowned. What does that even mean? Sophia didn't answer. She turned the page, her breath catching as she read the next entry. October 3rd, 1956. I am certain now that patient number 428 is the key. Her blood carries something unique, something the shadows recognize. They guide her, as they have begun to guide me. She will open the door. The key, Sophia whispered, her eyes darting to the tarnished object in her hand. He didn't mean this key. He meant her. My grandmother. Ethan stared at her, his expression incredulous. That's insane. You can't actually believe. Why not? Sophia interrupted. Everything about this place defies logic. Why should this be any different? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, clearly grappling with the implications. If that's true, then what did he do to her? And why did he stop? The asylum shut down not long after this entry. Sophia turned the question over in her mind. Why had it stopped? What had gone so wrong that even Grayson, in his madness, couldn't continue? We have to go back, she said, her voice firm. Ethan shot to his feet. Absolutely not. Are you even listening to yourself? That place nearly killed us, Sophia. We barely made it out. I don't have a choice, she said, meeting his gaze. This isn't just about a story anymore. It's about my family. My grandmother's life and her death are tied to that place. I need to know the truth. Ethan shook his head, frustration etched across his face. And what happens when the truth kills you? Because that's what's going to happen if we go back there. Sophia hesitated, her resolve wavering. He was right, it wasn't safe. But when she thought of her grandmother's face in that chamber, the fear and pain frozen in her lifeless eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. You don't have to come with me, she said quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think I'm just going to let you go alone? Sophia managed a faint smile. I wouldn't blame you if you did. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand over his face. You're impossible, you know that? Yeah, she said softly. I've been told. The following night, they stood at the gates of the asylum once more. The moon hung low in the sky, shrouded by clouds, and the air was colder than it had been the night before. This is a terrible idea, Ethan muttered as they stepped through the gates. Sophia didn't respond. Her focus was on the key, which felt heavier now, as though it were pulling her toward something. They retraced their steps through the asylum, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as though the building itself knew they had returned. When they reached the door to Wing C, Sophia hesitated. The memory of the shadows and the whispers made her chest tighten, but she forced herself to push forward. The stairs creaked beneath their weight as they descended, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, the hallway stretched out before them, lined with observation windows. Sophia's flashlight landed on one of the rooms, and her breath caught. Inside was a figure, motionless and shadowed, its features obscured by the darkness. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Ethan nodded, his grip tightening on his flashlight. "Yeah, let's keep moving." They pressed on, the oppressive atmosphere growing heavier. Finally, they reached the chamber they had fled from the night before. Sophia stepped inside, her flashlight illuminating the rows of desiccated figures. Her stomach churned as she approached the bed where her grandmother's remains lay. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. A faint sound reached her ears. A whisper, soft and fleeting. She froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Sophia," Ethan said urgently. "We need to go." But she didn't move. The whisper grew louder, clearer, forming words. "Find the door." Sophia's breath hitched. "Did you hear that?" Ethan shook his head. "Hear what?" "The whisper," Sophia said, turning to him. "It said to find the door." Ethan stared at her, his expression a mix of fear and disbelief. "Sophia, we need to leave. Now." But Sophia's gaze was drawn to the far wall, where faint markings began to glow. She stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating a symbol carved into the stone. A circle with jagged lines radiating outward. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" Ethan asked, his voice rising. "The door," Sophia said, pressing her hand against the symbol. The air around them seemed to shift, a low hum vibrating through the room. The shadows on the walls began to writhe, their movements frantic and unnatural. Ethan grabbed her arm. "Sophia, stop!" But it was too late. The symbol glowed brighter, and the room was engulfed in blinding light. When the light faded, Sophia and Ethan found themselves standing in an empty void, the walls of the asylum replaced by endless darkness. And in the distance, a figure emerged, tall and thin, with glowing eyes that pierced the shadows. The void stretched endlessly around them, an infinite black expanse that seemed to swallow sound. Sophia and Ethan stood frozen, their breaths shallow as they stared at the figure emerging from the darkness. It moved with a deliberate, unnatural grace, its glowing eyes fixed on them. As it drew closer, Sophia could see more details. Its elongated limbs, its skin pale and stretched too tightly over a skeletal frame. The air around it shimmered, warping as if reality itself recoiled from its presence. Ethan gripped Sophia's arm, his voice low and trembling. "What is that?" Sophia couldn't answer. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet refused to obey. There was a strange pull to the figure, an almost magnetic force that kept her rooted in place. The figure stopped a few feet away, and though it had no mouth, Sophia heard its voice clearly, low, resonant, and reverberating inside her skull. "You have come to open the door." Sophia's throat tightened. What door?" The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "The door to the shadows. The door to truth. You carry the key." Her hand instinctively tightened around the tarnished key. "Why me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Why my grandmother?" The figure's gaze bore into her, and for a moment, the void seemed to tremble. "The blood," it said. "Her blood. Your blood calls to us. It binds you to the shadows." Ethan stepped in front of Sophia, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "Whatever this is, we want no part of it. Leave us alone." The figure's head turned toward him, and the air grew colder. "You do not belong here," it said. Its voice sharpened, each word cutting through the void like shards of ice. Before either of them could react, the ground beneath Ethan's feet cracked open, and shadowy tendrils shot upward, wrapping around his legs. He shouted in terror, struggling to free himself, but the tendrils tightened, pulling him down. "Ethan!" Sophia screamed, grabbing his arm. The figure watched impassively as the tendrils dragged Ethan further into the void. His flashlight fell from his hand, spinning as it landed, its beam illuminating the growing horror on his face. "Sophia, help me!" he yelled, his voice desperate. Sophia pulled with all her strength, but the tendrils were too strong. They yanked Ethan down, and with a final, heart-wrenching cry, he vanished into the darkness. Sophia stumbled backward, her knees buckling as she collapsed onto the ground. Tears streamed down her face, and her hands trembled violently. "You carry the key," the figure said again, its voice devoid of emotion. "You must choose." Sophia looked up at it, her heart pounding. "Choose what?" "The door," it said simply. "To open it, or to leave it closed?" Sophia's mind raced. She thought of Ethan, of her grandmother, of the horrors she had seen in the asylum. Every instinct told her to destroy the key, to walk away and never look back. But another part of her, the part that had driven her to uncover the truth no matter the cost, hesitated. "What happens if I open it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure's glowing eyes flared brighter. "Truth will be revealed. The shadows will be freed. The world will never be the same. And if I don't?" The figure tilted its head again. "The shadows will remain, but you will carry their whispers forever." Sophia's pulse thundered in her ears. She looked down at the key in her hand, its tarnished surface glinting faintly in the darkness. It felt heavier than before, as though it carried the weight of the decision she was about to make. She thought of her grandmother, trapped and tormented in the asylum, and of Ethan, who had sacrificed himself to protect her. She thought of all the lives destroyed by Grayson's experiments and the shadows that had haunted this place for decades. Taking a deep breath, she stood. "If I open the door," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her, "will they be free?" The figure's eyes dimmed slightly, as if in thought. "Freedom is relative. The shadows will no longer be bound to this place, but their nature cannot change." Sophia nodded, her grip tightening on the key. "Then I'll face whatever comes next." The figure stepped aside, revealing a massive circular door that materialized in the void. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, radiating an eerie light. At its center was a keyhole waiting for her. Sophia approached the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air around her seemed to pulse with energy, the void itself vibrating with anticipation. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the keyhole. Then, with a deep breath, she inserted the key and turned it. The door groaned as it began to open, the carvings shifting and writhing as light poured through the widening gap. The light was blinding, and a deafening roar filled the void as the shadows surged forward, spilling out like a flood. Sophia stumbled back, shielding her eyes as the shadows swept past her. They moved with purpose, their forms twisting and morphing as they spread into the infinite darkness. When the roar subsided, the void was still again, and Sophia found herself standing alone. The door had disappeared, and the key was gone. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice echoing faintly. A soft, familiar voice answered. "Not yet." Sophia turned, her breath catching as she saw her grandmother standing before her. She looked younger, whole, her eyes filled with a serene sadness. "Grandma!" Sophia's voice broke as tears filled her eyes. Her grandmother nodded, stepping closer. "You freed them, Sophia, and in doing so, you freed me." Sophia's legs gave out, and she sank to the ground, overwhelmed by emotion. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, "for everything you went through." Her grandmother knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her cheek. "It wasn't your fault. You've done what I couldn't. You've broken the cycle." Sophia closed her eyes, leaning into the touch. But when she opened them again, her grandmother was gone, and the void had begun to fade. The next thing she knew, she was standing outside the asylum, the cold night air biting at her skin. The building was silent, its oppressive aura gone. Sophia turned to speak to Ethan, only to remember he wasn't there. Her heart ached, but she knew he had saved her in more ways than one. As she walked back to her car, she felt a strange sense of peace. The shadows were gone, the asylum's grip on her family broken. But as she glanced at the rearview mirror, she thought she saw a faint, flickering shadow in the back seat. Sophia smiled faintly. "I'll never forget," she whispered. And with that, she drove away, leaving the asylum and its secrets behind. The Grayson Asylum disappeared from Sophia's rearview mirror as she drove down the winding road back to Blackthorn Hollow. The oppressive weight that had clung to her during her time at the asylum had lifted, but a different heaviness now settled in her chest. A mix of grief, relief, and an unsettling sense that the story wasn't truly over. Ethan's absence was a sharp ache. His fear had been justified, his warnings prophetic, and yet he had stayed by her side until the end. She could still hear his voice, see his face as the shadows had claimed him. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, tears blurring her vision. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered. "You deserved better." The town of Blackthorn Hollow was quiet when she arrived, its streets deserted. The fog had rolled in thick, blanketing the small buildings and casting an otherworldly glow under the streetlights. Sophia parked her car outside the inn and sat there for a long moment, staring at the faint outline of the hollow hearth's flickering neon sign. The air in her room felt different now, less suffocating. She set her bag down on the bed and pulled out her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. Normally, the adrenaline of uncovering a story would have driven her to start writing immediately, but this time was different. This wasn't just another exposé or investigative piece. This was personal. She stared at the blank document, the cursor blinking steadily, until she finally began to type. The Shadows Beyond, A Family's Truth, by Sophia Delacroix. The Grayson Asylum was a place of healing in name only. Behind its imposing stone walls, countless patients were subjected to unspeakable horrors, their suffering hidden under the guise of progress and innovation. What began as one man's quest to unravel the mysteries of the human mind spiraled into something far darker, an obsession that blurred the line between science and madness. This is not just the story of an asylum, nor of the man who ran it. This is the story of the shadows that linger, both literal and metaphorical, in the places we least expect. It is the story of my grandmother, a woman whose life and death were shaped by this place. And it is my story, the story of the truth I uncovered and the choices I made to bring it to light. Sophia paused, her chest tightening. She glanced at the photo sitting beside her laptop. Her grandmother as a young woman, smiling warmly in a garden. It was the only photograph she had left of her, a stark contrast to the desiccated figure she had found in the asylum. "You're free now," Sophia whispered, brushing her fingers over the image. A knock at the door startled her, and she froze. For a moment, her mind raced with possibilities. She stood, her heart pounding, and approached the door cautiously. When she opened it, the hallway was empty. Only the faint hum of the inn's heater broke the silence. She stepped out, looking both ways, but there was no one there. As she turned to go back inside, something caught her eye, a folded piece of paper on the floor. She bent down and picked it up, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unfamiliar but delicate, like the letter she'd received before her journey began. "The truth has a cost. Are you prepared to pay it?" Sophia's breath caught, her mind racing. She stepped back into her room, shutting the door behind her. Her hands shook as she reread the note, its meaning gnawing at her. Had she truly escaped the asylum's grasp, or had she merely invited its influence into her life? The faint shadow she thought she'd seen in the car came rushing back to her mind. She sat on the bed, the note clutched in her hands. The weight of the choice she'd made pressed down on her. The asylum's secrets were out, but at what cost? Ethan was gone, the shadows had been released, and she carried the burden of that decision alone. The wind outside howled, rattling the window. Sophia looked toward the glass, her reflection faintly visible in the darkness beyond. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing behind her. A shadow, tall and still. She turned sharply, but the room was empty. The whispers began that night, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but unmistakable. They crept into her dreams, into the edges of her waking thoughts, always just out of reach yet always present. Sophia knew she had freed the shadows, but they weren't done with her. Months later, the article went live. It was an instant sensation, the details of the Grayson Asylum's horrors captivating readers across the country. Calls flooded in from publishers, news outlets, and even filmmakers, all eager to tell the story in new ways. But Sophia stayed out of the spotlight. She avoided interviews and declined offers. She moved to a quiet town far from Blackthorn Hollow, hoping to escape the whispers that still lingered in the back of her mind. And yet they followed her. Late at night, when the world was still, she would hear them, soft, insistent, and growing louder. The shadows lingered at the edges of her vision, flickering in and out of existence like half-formed memories. One night, as she sat at her desk writing, her computer screen flickered. The cursor moved on its own, and words began to appear. "You opened the door. We are free. But so are you." Sophia's breath caught as the screen went dark. She leaned back in her chair, her hands trembling. She had uncovered the truth, but the cost had been greater than she could have imagined. The asylum was gone, but its shadows lived on in her mind, in her dreams, and perhaps in the world itself. And though she had no proof, she knew one thing for certain: the whispers would never stop.